Hey guys, Steven here and Wilson over there. Welcome to another Tuesday podcast. Um, could be called Tradesmen Tuesdays, Tradesmen Talk, Tool Talk. We'll change it up, but another Tuesday, another opportunity for us to kind of share with you guys what our weeks have looked like working in the trades businesses. And so yeah, hopefully you guys find value and just going to be a conversation. So how'd your week go, man?
The week was good. We got got a new vehicle, so that's always positive.
Congrats.
Yeah, it helps with everything. Not by choice. I got my car got totaled, so upgraded. Yeah,
But not your body. So
but
that's
not my body. Which actually great lesson there. Even when bad things happen, there's still a lot to be thankful for. It could have been a lot worse. But the week's good. We just actually finished out building out a new drying room for the crew in Austin, which is a big step. In Austin, summertime, paint dries really fast.
yeah.
It's hot. It's not super humid. But this time of season, it is actually surprisingly more humid. And the temperatures are in the 60s during daytime, colder at night. So we were having to extend drying time, so it was slowing the guys down. So we just got a room built up. The last thing is we're working on some custom designs for the doors so that it'll really like almost airtight seal the room so that we can drop the humidity pretty dramatically in there. So really excited for that. Our guy training has been absolutely awesome. We did a check-in with Logan and our lead tech Kurt out there. And
Yeah. What's that? This is his first week?
this will be his third week.
Third week. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So, we've been really focusing on a lot of the prep work, just getting that really mastered and handled. He'll probably start learning how to spray here in the next week, maybe two. And we're hoping by January 1st, he can be live, ready to go in his own house, working on some project.
Yeah, for sure. That's about a month and a half away.
Yeah, exactly. A month and a half away, and then we've got holidays. I think our guys, we're going to be shutting the shop down probably the week of Christmas. Yeah,
Week of Christmas?
week of Christmas. Yeah,
Okay. Christmas is Saturday, right?
yeah, that's a good question.
I think Christmas is Saturday. One of the holidays, either Thanksgiving or Christmas, but I was kind of considering how to approach that as well. If we're going to take the week before off or the week after off.
Right.
I just told my guys, hey, listen, tell me if you want the week off. Just give me some heads up so we know how to rearrange the calendar. But
Yeah, it is. You're right. It is maybe I'm thinking of Thanksgiving. Yeah. So yeah, they're going to take. Sorry, they're traveling for Thanksgiving. That'll actually be a good thing to address. We have not addressed that yet. It is on Saturday. I think it depends, man. We might see if we can move the job that normally start that Monday up to Sunday, and they work and finish up the 23rd, and then come back Tuesday and work through that Saturday. Ultimately, it's gonna really depend on the guys.
Right.
We try and give them flexibility. Our biggest thing is if you want to take time off, just let us know ahead of time so we can plan the schedule.
yeah, that's how we're doing it. And maybe Logan, it could give Logan a reason to take a little break. Maybe do like a half week sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, he could
Not taking on as
definitely.
many jobs.
I think one of the hardest things about starting a business is the first 6 months, man. There's not a lot of free time for vacations.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he's
for sure.
embraced that. He already canceled a trip this year so that he can focus on his business, which not everybody's willing to make those kind of sacrifices, which I think is part of the reason not everybody succeeds in business.
Oh, for sure. I mean, having to commit to the vision and then commit to the sacrifices along the way are very, very hard to do as you're presented with them, because you may want to go out to dinner that night just as bad in the moment as you want to finish the job on time, but to prioritize things. We talked about that a little bit last week, prioritizing. And
Yep.
your team in Texas seems like they've been doing an awesome job with that. And it sounds like you're creating a really good culture over there where people are putting in some extra hours for the sake of getting things done.
Yeah. Well, one thing that, and this obviously comes from you, you've done a great job of helping us stay focused on this is, we're not just promoting, hey, this is what you guys are doing right now, but every person that's working with us right now is working there with the intention and hope that they are going to learn to, like, they're going to love this business enough that they're going to start their own shop. Right. And not everybody's going to reach that point. Maybe 4 months in, they go, hey, this is, I don't see myself doing this long term, and that's okay. We'll find out early. But the vision is learn this, love this, grow this. And it's part of the process. How's your
sure. My week's been good. I was moving out of my last house, so the past 7 days have been really focused on getting everything situated.
You have a beautiful motorcycle thing in storage?
The motorcycle is still in the wood shop space.
Okay.
So, I thought you were talking about my actual motorcycle.
No, just the image I want.
Bad news. I actually was moving that and it shattered.
Oh no.
It kind of actually looks a lot cooler because it's got this whole blurred shattered effect. But it just makes it very dangerous to move from where it's at.
That's cool. Maybe we can coat it in epoxy when I'm there for our next training.
That's actually a great idea.
Yeah,
for sure. It's in my storage unit. I was placing it into the storage unit, and I guess the weight was just off, and it just.
Dude, they crack fast. I bought one, and they're very sharp.
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm just gonna leave that there.
Yeah. Okay, well, that'd be a fun thing to play with.
So, finally got everything out. The guys have been great, man. You talk about evolving your guys into that partnership mentality or leadership mentality, and I've been really focused on that the past 12 months, and I've slowly taken steps back, putting a little bit more responsibility on them as far as picking up materials, communicating with customers, much less managing now. In a sense, just like our cabinet startup members, I'm here for support.
Yep.
I have a team around everything now. So we have jobs coming in, the person does this, that person does that. And so I don't really have a huge role for myself in the operation other than being there for support and putting out fires. And it's been hard because I am somewhat of a control type of person. I prefer control because if I feel like I can control on it, it feels like I'm relying on myself more than others. And that's not always the case. And it's been very much a practice to relinquish that control and just have trust in the process, have trust in the team. And things have been so much easier for me in a few different ways over the past year. So it's got me really excited for the future. And I've created that similar future for the guys on my team. So you mentioned giving your new hires the opportunity to evolve into a leader. That's what I'm doing with my Tampa shop, with the Orlando shop. And then I already have that going on with the Ocala shop.
Nice.
I just got confirmed. I mentioned it last week. The guy who reached out to me, he had worked with us for about 6 months, and we were playing with the idea of having him set up a team over in the Gainesville Villages type of area.
Okay.
And we got his commitment, had a long conversation with him yesterday.
Nice.
And so he's full on board with setting up the team over in Gainesville. So that's going to be another team. And we're really just empowering these guys. And what we've done, the network we've created with Cabinet Startup, I'm simply applying to my local locations. And so I am dramatically decreasing my liabilities and just becoming a resource for them.
Right.
And because of the path that I've provided, there is a revenue share involvement, but there's very much real ownership on their end as well.
Right.
Even to the extent where I'm having the leases put into their names.
Oh, wow. Okay. Big step. And it's a win-win, right? If you find the right person and they've got that stake and that share, they're going to treat it like their baby. But it's nice to know. It's really nice to know that when you run into some problem that you've never seen before, which when you start your own business is inevitably going to happen.
All the time.
Yeah, there's no way not to. It's nice to know that you've got that person in your corner, and the first time there's a really big screw up and you're able to be saved because you have that support, it becomes very clear why people pay so much money for that, right?
Right.
it's a no-brainer once you see the consequence of not having that type of support.
Yeah, we want to provide them all the resources and support that, that they're ever going to need, but it's their business.
Yeah.
You know, they aren't working for me anymore. We genuinely are partners. And so there's a huge dynamic shift that comes with that. And like you mentioned, you know, they operate differently because they are the owner. And so just clearing that path for them. And that's what's got me excited to show and expose this type of business building with other home services. You know,
Yeah.
we're doing it now with epoxy floors. You know, there's a lot of opportunity to apply it to all of these other home services as well, where you take people who want to learn, who want an opportunity, who maybe wants to work with their hands, and you teach them a high value skill.
Yep.
And you allow them to learn that skill, you allow them to profit from that skill, and then we give them a path to build a business around that skill. And you know, that's a lot of value that's provided from people like us, and so we're rewarded for that, but it's a ton of value and life-changing opportunity for the people who take us up on that opportunity.
100%.
So,
yeah, it's you know, you and I
just about acknowledging and seeing that unfold.
Well, and you and I talked about it a little bit last week. I don't know on the podcast, but I know privately we talked about it. Like a lot of times people have a hard time when they're looking at businesses, or when they're considering what they want to do, they get caught up in percentages and costs and not an opportunity.
Yeah.
Which is it's a weird place to spend your time. You know, if you've got an offer to make $100,000 a year with somebody and you split, you know, 50% of the profits with them versus making $50,000 a year, keeping 100% of the profits yourself. It should be a no-brainer, but sometimes people focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why we have found it has been much more of a seamless transition. You know, we've created partnerships with our cabinet startup members, but it came from oftentimes delivering value first.
Yes.
And I certainly have done that with my own in-house teams. And so they've recognized the value, they've appreciated and benefited from the value that I bring. Yep. And so evolving them into a partnership is a no-brainer for them. They already have the mindset and they've already seen the proof of concept. And so it is a no-brainer for them. But I could see it being somewhat harder for people who don't understand what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and don't have their mindset really established. To be successful in any business, you have to have some underlying understanding of certain things. And so it's been a cool journey. I'm excited to keep going.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah. You have to either have that understanding or you have to be willing to pay the price to learn those lessons.
Yeah.
Which there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think it's hugely important for us to continue to develop the mindset portion of the programs that we offer.
Yeah.
So that we can build that almost philosophy around business. You know, the concept of business being a solution that people are willing to pay for. You know, the whole concept of giving value in order to receive value. Like, you know, different things like that can really shape how you approach your challenges, how you approach your customers, and approach the opportunities that come up along the way. You know, if you don't have the right perspective, you're not going to receive or even acknowledge what could be an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, you know, it's interesting because to work on that mindset, you have to have, you know, in some ways developed enough trust with that person to have them open to even receiving that, which I think is one of the big challenges, and hopefully something that the podcast helps to address, because there's, at least, you know, one of the things I've seen, and there's a lot of business people out there, but you know, there's a lot of Jordan Belforts out there, you know, and this is something that I think about all the time. That guy has a podcast and sells products to people. You know, he literally said, I got rich by stealing from people. By the way, buy my product on business. I'm like, dude, that's the last person you should give money to.
Yeah. I mean, I think almost, you know, Jordan has a niche market, you know, like they say in marketing, meet people where they're at. Yeah. So for the people who feel like business is about taking advantage of other people, they're going to resonate with someone who projects that sort of mentality. Yeah. And so, you know, certainly there's a whole cohort of people who are not going to align with that perspective. But, you know, I respect Jordan Belfort in the sense of hustle and, you know, having a vision and making things happen. You know, how he approached that, you know, may not be, ethical, and maybe he's a different person now than who he was back then.
I've heard prison can change people.
Yeah, people. Yeah, I mean, hopefully there's some good that comes out of anything crazy like that. But I think he's trying to better people's lives in his own unique way, and hopefully he does that in an ethical sense. But I think creating that culture, creating the understanding is going to help people receive the information, and most importantly, motivate them to apply that information. If they respect and understand and have confidence in the teacher, they're going to manage that information a lot better.
Well, so for you, because we talk about mindset with our students a lot, and obviously within our own businesses. If there was one lesson on mindset you could impart to anybody watching, what would it be?
I would say this: the biggest impact that was put onto me as far as mentality or philosophy was that literally anything is possible. There's always a determination of likelihood. Things may not be likely,
sure,
but everything literally is possible to an extent. And understanding that if someone did something that I want to do, it's of course very possible that I could do that as well. And so just understanding that anything is possible has allowed me to accept possibilities. If I have a limited perspective on what is possible based off of my own experiences, it can dramatically hinder what I'm able to achieve.
Yeah.
The fact that I not only understand everything is possible, but that people who direct themselves towards an initiative have a possible chance of achieving that, and the more effort and the decisions and behaviors that they choose to put forth can dramatically change that likelihood. And so I would say the biggest mindset thing is definitely understanding that everything is possible, and also knowing that anything can be learned with enough consistent effort.
Yeah,
humans are extremely adaptable. That has been proven. I mean, look what we're dealing with this whole COVID thing. Like, there is certainly a new normal, and we were taught to do what we're currently doing, good or bad. Humans are very adaptable. They're able to learn anything. And so if you want to learn how to run a specific business, if you want to learn a specific skill, you just need to put a little bit of effort consistently over time, and you will learn that thing. But
yeah,
that's a whole nother challenge within itself, is the consistency part.
It's probably the most underrated part for a lot of people, and I can't say I've never been guilty of this myself, because I have experienced shiny object syndrome as much or more than the average person. But the consistency is 100% what makes a difference, especially in business. You're going to have to do it again and again and again. You got to fail, and you got to continue to not just do it, but to continually reassess it, right? You have to take the time to go back and look at what previously happened and go, okay, cool. Am I making steps in the right direction, both with your learning and with your business? But the consistency to do that on a regular basis is what makes that real.
For sure. And it's such a pet peeve of mine when people limit themselves by saying, oh, I'm not a tech person, or, oh, I'm not organized, or I don't work with my hands. Well, that is now true. The fact that you believe that makes it true. If you believe that anything is possible and you can learn anything, you're going to be confronted with challenges or opportunities that you may know nothing about. But if you can understand the benefit of going to the other side of that ignorance, then you very well could be met with an amazing opportunity that dramatically changes your life. Yep. You don't have to do what you don't like doing forever, but there's certain opportunities that exist when you do become open to learning the things that you don't currently know.
Well, it kind of takes the responsibility off too. It's easier to say I'm not than to recognize that in reality you've decided not to be.
Exactly.
And
people will take that and project that on their life for years and years, and then something will happen, or some realization will occur to where they look back and are like, damn, Tony Robbins was right.
Yeah.
But they find out 10, 20, 30 years later, and it certainly is avoidable.
Very much so.
What about you though? What are some mindset things that have shaped your life or that you hold fundamentally true?
Man, they're probably one of the biggest is that problems are opportunity, right? Like, and I don't remember who actually first said it to me. I don't know if it was my father, or if it was somebody in Southwestern when I was part of participating in that program. But they looked at me, and I'm sure I was complaining about something. They're like, "Well, that sounds like a really great opportunity to come up with a solution that people would probably pay a lot of money for." Yeah. I was like, "Huh." That is, somebody one day was like, "God, I really hate getting up to turn off the lights." Bam, clap on lights, and it's always funny because people use that as an example all the time, but most of what we take for granted on a daily basis has resulted in somebody going, "I don't like this. What if?" As opposed to just, "I don't like this." And I think so many people start with half the sentence and then just stop there, which is crazy because a lot of people have gotten very, very wealthy by just answering really simple sentences. And so, probably the biggest mindset thing is that, problems are actually just opportunities from the wrong perspective, or if you look at them the right way, it really is an opportunity. That's been a big focus for me. The other thing is that, it's actually kind of similar to what you were saying, but it's this idea that we're not limited by our choices so much as our perception of choices. So very much anything is possible, but the only things that you can perceive are the things you're going to act on. And so, I hear people sometimes like, "Man, I really hate where I live." It's a weird thing to say. It's a really weird thing to say. Like, you hate where you live? Like, dude, move. I can't. I was like, "Oh man, that's weird. Is the Army like outside? Like, what do you mean you can't move?" And there may be places in the world where that's true, but our vast majority of our audience is in America. Like, you can, right? Yeah. It's you've decided that you can't for whatever reason. And so, I think those two shifts from those people saying, "Okay, well, every problem I experience is an opportunity to solve it." And as soon as I realize that opportunity exists, I've now created a new pathway for myself that it makes people a lot more self-reliant. And
that is directly applicable to business as well.
Oh yeah.
When you talk about people being dissatisfied with their lives, whether it's the house they live in or the constraints that they're put under because of their income, a lot of people say they want to start a business, but then they stop at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather, and they bring up the reasons. It's so easy to see the evidence for why they can't or why it's too hard to start a business, even though there's just as much, if not more, evidence as to how they would be successful, why they would be successful, why they are destined to actually start a business, because not everyone has that thought, "Oh, I want to start a business." But if you actually have that thought, I believe there's an underlying destiny for you to start your business, or else you wouldn't have had that thought.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. Well, because, when people go to start a business, a lot of times they ask like, "I want to start a business," and they'll talk to somebody if you've ever said, "I want to start a business," and you've told more than 3 friends that you want to start a business, there's a 100% chance that one of those 3 friends was like, "It's never going to work."
Yeah.
One of the guys that's coming out for training in here in November, when he was first talking about this, he was like, "Yeah, I talked to my sister and she was like, yeah, this is a really bad idea." And I was like, "Well, you've got a job right now." He was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, what if you told your sister you're going to start a business doing what you do right now?" He's like, "Oh, she'd say there's no way it was going to work." And I was like, "But you're employed doing that right now." And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "All right, so you see the condition here. It has nothing, it's got nothing to do with the business." And so the reason it's not going to work is because people come up with all these things like, "Well, what if, what if, what if, what if the business fails?" But they never bother to answer the question. And the looming idea of what if this fails is in of itself really scary. Sure. It's like, I'm going to drive a car. Well, what if the car gets in a wreck?
Right.
Okay, well, I don't know. Wear your seatbelt. Drive on the right side of the road. Stop at stop signs. Like, there are a lot of what ifs that can help reduce the odds of that actually being a problem.
Exactly.
But people never go there. And it's such an interesting concept. And I actually learned this. I had a mentor before I ever paid this guy, and I spent tens of thousands of dollars to work with him. Before I ever worked with him, I saw a presentation, and he literally was like, "I'm not going to do all this fancy shit. Let me just tell you what you need to learn. You can just write down the sentence and probably leave. It's how can I blank without blank? Pick your blanks. Meditate on that. That right there is more than you're going to get in almost any other thing." And still to this day, I think he was right. I mean, that sentence has stuck with me, because if you can go away from what if to how can I blank without blank, you can solve so many problems.
There's so much power in simplicity and clarity like that.
Yeah.
But with our brains literally designed to problem solve, and if there's not a problem, we are very good at creating one.
Yes.
it becomes a humanistic thing that we sometimes have to fight, where we will sometimes reject a solution if it sounds too simple.
Yes.
If it sounds too easy, because it's easier to justify not taking action because of the unknown problems that what if or may exist, and so having the mentality that, getting the things you want can be simple. It may require a lot of work, but it can be a very simple solution to acquire what you want, and so I am excited to watch the new guy who maybe had some limiting beliefs and clearly is taking the leap of faith. And when it comes to, I've been in entrepreneurship, business ownership for most of my adult life,
Right.
Still very young, and so that's exciting, but I've learned some things. And when people rationalize not starting a business because of these what ifs, well, in a sense, they're diverting the responsibility of success on the business owner. And that same business owner often has a very similar story or background or experiences as the employees.
Yep.
The only difference is the decision making and how they went about deciding. And you have some good insight on the method of decision making. Maybe that would be a good segue when people are deciding what they want and then potentially deciding how to get it.
Well, yeah. It's interesting. This is something I was spending some time on even today, kind of researching to help people kind of through this process. Because most of what I do with Cabinet Startup is helping people walk through the decision-making process of, first and foremost, do you want to start a business? A lot of people are looking around for businesses before they've even decided that they want to start a business, which is like window shopping for clothes you don't need. You can do it, I guess. It just doesn't seem like a good expenditure of time. And part of the reason they haven't is because anytime you're looking at a decision, there's really three core things your brain has to work through. So you got the three C's, I guess. Three C's will be the theme. The first is complexity, right? And that's part of the reason that the what if left alone is so challenging for people, because if I want to start a business, what if it fails? Well, the idea of how to not make it fail seems really complex to me. And so I don't move forward any further, as opposed to actually going through and breaking down, okay, what is actually complex? What is not complex? And there are some decisions that are going to be complex no matter what you do, right?
Sure.
But complexity doesn't necessarily mean impossibility.
Right.
But you have to understand that dynamic. You have to actually work that out if you're going to ever work through it. The second thing, which is all of these things are always going to be interrelated, they're interdependent. The second thing is actually certainty. And it's so funny because your certainty is definitely going to be based on how complex something is, right? It's like, how certain are you that you can walk up and go to the fridge right now? I'm very certain that I can go to the fridge right now. I've done it a million times. How certain am I can do a backflip? Not so much. Right. So then we have to get into what's the complexity of the backflip. Did I do leg day recently? And so it's interesting because the certainty can't really happen until complexity has been figured out. And then once they've gotten through those, the last thing is consequences. And consequences are the big overlooming part of it that people really use an excuse not to figure out the first two. the consequences of something going wrong, like, the consequences of me starting this business and failing is that my family starves, right? And so that consequence becomes so big in people's minds. And, most of the time, a lot of their families wouldn't starve. People are creative, right? You're not going to let your family starve. I would go get a job at McDonald's before I let my family starve.
Right.
That's the idea they have in their head. And so when the consequences seem that high and you don't actually have any certainty because you haven't worked through the process of figuring out how complex it is, you're never going to get anywhere, because the size of the consequence is going to be massive because you have no way of actually mitigating that.
Right.
And you can do this with almost any decision, but it's funny because the familiarity that we experience with objects or with actions will reduce our perceived complexity. And driving is my favorite example because all of us drive. Driving is incredibly dangerous. You're in a screaming metal death trap going 80 miles an hour in the wrong direction from these other screaming metal death traps, half of whom are
only trusting everyone around you.
Yeah. And with how often, like, I watched a video not too long ago where a lady literally walked into a fountain because she was texting on her phone. She drives, dude. She drives. And so it's like,
doing the same thing.
Oh, 100%. And so it's so funny because when you look at an idea like driving, like, what are the consequences if you get in a major wreck on the interstate? Death, super duper high, right? How complex is driving? Actually pretty complex.
Pretty complex.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. But if you're used to it, you've been doing it a long time, right? It's complex, but you understand it. So check. We're good. Yeah, I understand it. Complexity is not a problem. So it's like, how certain am I can get there? Well, I drive all the time. It's not a big deal. Boom. What are the consequences? Well, even though the consequences are dire, they don't actually feel that way because we understand the complexities and we have the certainty that I've done this long enough, it's not going to be an issue.
Right. That's huge, man. That certainty component is probably the most impactful because, like you mentioned, things can be very complex. But if you have that certainty, it's going to empower you in a whole nother way. I mean, you talk about a backflip. Most people, when you talk about can, or in other words, possibility, most people can do a backflip, but they're scared shitless.
Oh, yeah.
So they will screw themselves up, not out of impossibility, but out of lack of certainty. Right. It doesn't require a whole lot other than just the certainty and building familiarity around that process. So maybe you start off by doing a backflip into a foam pit, and then you go on a trampoline, and then you do it on a spring floor, and then you do it on the grass, and then you can do it in the concrete, and it doesn't matter because you're familiar with it. You're certain about your ability to do it regardless of the complexity. And just having certainty in yourself would be such a game changer for a lot of people watching this. The certainty in the ability to figure it out, the certainty in their ability and likelihood of being successful with their consistency, and just having certainty around what is possible for them would dramatically change the trajectory of people wanting to start a business.
100%. Well, the other thing that I thought was really funny, because, I've read a lot of books on decision making. I was, doing some research on it today just because I saw something that sparked my interest. But the thing that I thought was most interesting is when you look at your complexity, your certainty, your consequences. Most people, when you hear consequences, you're like, okay, what are all the bad things that can happen?
Sure.
But consequences aren't always necessarily negative, right? Maybe we call it effects.
Sure.
Is a better way of looking at it, because what most people don't look at are what are the positive consequences, what are the positive effects of that same thing. It's like, okay, well, I want to start a business. What are the consequences? If it fails, my family, can't eat, or it succeeds and my family vacations in the Maldives. But a lot of people aren't considering the positive consequences and how resolving the complexity and the certainty makes that a reality. So it's not, for most people, it's just weighing out cons as opposed to actually looking at both sides of it.
The consequences are binary. It's either you vacation in the Maldives, you're successful, or you starve.
Yeah.
At worst case, it's 50-50.
Yeah.
You apply some consistent effort and you develop your certainty over time, your chances for the desired outcome increases.
Yep.
But to convince yourself out of an opportunity is natural, but it's silly. And if you can fight that compulsion, you have such an edge on your own livelihood and the potential people around you. And that becomes a whole nother discussion, creating your environment and the people that are around you and how they can in turn affect our mentality and our mindset. But this could be a super long conversation that that jumps around for hours. But I love that the 3 C's of decision making: complexity, certainty, and consequences, and keeping in mind that those consequences can be positive, and putting the justification and the worthy effort into understanding what are some of the positive consequences can be more powerful than going the easy route and just pointing out the negative ones.
Yeah, if you want to be really fun, what are the positive
balance though?
What are the positive consequences of success? What are the negative consequences of success? Right? Like we just talked about, Logan had to cancel a trip so this business could succeed. Or, right, what are the positive consequences of failure? You get to tell everybody you were right. I knew I wasn't going to succeed. And there are people that take a lot of, I don't know why, but
also feel better about themselves.
Yeah, well, yes, and it's a strange thing, but the really fun thing about kind of working through all of this is if you can focus on how do I get to the point where I understand the complexity, understand the certainty, and understand the consequences. You may find that starting a business is not for you, right?
Right,
and that's perfectly okay.
True.
But at least you actually know, or you may find that this isn't the right business, but this other thing is. It just gives you the ability to take a lot more control over how you approach it, which you're going to need that same thing in actually starting the business. You're going to have that for how you're going to do your marketing, for how you're going to charge your customers. You're going to be making these decisions throughout the whole process anyways. You might as well have a system for working through it.
For sure. Yeah. And so that's something that I think a lot of people watching this can really take from, is just some of those underlying belief systems. And when it comes to acting on those beliefs, you're faced with some decisions. So understanding how to go about decision making and giving yourself a fair analysis of the opportunity that you might be faced with. And we touched a little bit on one of your core beliefs is problems are opportunities. And a huge problem that we are observing in our industry is the lack of supply with service providers.
Yeah.
Being homeowners, a big problem can be not being able to have high quality work done reliably or affordably. And so when there's a huge labor gap right now in almost every industry, it's a big problem for these homeowners, but it can be a huge opportunity for those looking to fill that gap as a provider. And that's what we're looking to revolutionize in a way, where we're not only giving people a path to follow, but also a platform to potentially build off of. We're going to say this a lot on this podcast, the mission to change the way people get into trades. That method of initiation or introduction might change as circumstances and opportunities change. But that overarching mission, I think, is a potential way to solve the big problem that exists, which is the huge lack of supply with this ever increasing demand. In Business 101, supply and demand, if you're low on supply and there's high on demand, your pricing goes up, which is good for those of us right now, because we're making very good money off of very simple service. And we can continue to do so even with an injection of a bunch of providers, because we learn even within the new supply of providers, there's going to be ongoing problems and challenges that we can present solutions to. Prime example with Cabinet Startup, my main focus was as a cabinet refinishing provider. Well, as I started growing my business and opening up multiple teams, there was very recognizable problems that became opportunities as far as effectively training and scaling the business.
Yes.
And now we've done so to the point where we can grow as fast as we want to on a local level, but now we've done it dozens and dozens of times on a national level because we've engineered those systems effectively enough. And that's just with one service. So we can continue to bring people into these low served markets in a bunch of states around the country. I mean, we have a ton of teams just in Texas alone, and they're all doing well with a ton of upside potential because of the opportunities that exist there and the lack of supply.
Oh, and we barely scratched the surface in Texas. Texas is such a massive market, and everybody's moving there right now. Anyways, I mean, we've had no problems getting business in Texas. In fact, it's been quite the opposite. We're the biggest thing is scaling up fast enough to keep up with demand.
Right.
Which is a great problem to have for, if you've ever been in a business where getting leads is the hardest part, having plenty of customers is definitely a blessing.
Yeah, it definitely helps when you can get a ton of deposits up front and have that pool of cash to then reinvest into new hires, reinvest into effective tools and resources for the business, or additional marketing so you can keep feeding more crews. You can really blow this thing up. We've had a member of our company have multiple locations within the first year. He's doing, I don't know if I guess we're allowed to say, multiple six figures, or he's on the trajectory of doing a ton more than that over the course of the year. And it's just awesome to watch these people take this information and apply it and then ask for help when they need it. Yep. And overcome the challenge, and then they move forward and on to the next one. And it's just that forward momentum I love to watch, all from solving people's problems, and so as we evolve this platform and give people opportunities in other trades and, connect with institutions to really nationalize this opportunity and create a new standard of education where, a traditional model isn't necessarily the best one or the only one that people can choose.
Yep.
I think the sky's the limit. And, as our generation gets older, the generation before us gets older, it's a compounding effect. And so they're all going to have homes that need to be remodeled or improved or rebuilt. And when it comes to home services, you don't have to worry about robots taking over your job anytime soon.
No.
I mean, Amazon is just now doing that in their facilities that are predetermined rectangles. Try to build a robot that's maneuvering around people's yards and the cats and the little details of the corners and crevices and cleaning and communicating with the customers. Like, there's so much nuance to home services that we're going to incorporate technology within our business, but it will not replace our business.
Even that's been slow to happen. I mean, one of the things that I think is most interesting about the trades is the level of sophistication is not quite there.
Which is good and bad.
It's good and bad. It's good. Again, problems are opportunities. It's really good if you're looking to solve it. I always think back to, our partners in Florida. We implemented a pretty straightforward email marketing campaign for those guys. We recorded 4 videos, put a little bit of copy. I think, grand total is probably 6 to 8 hours worth of work. They've told us at least twice about people just saying, yeah, we decided we're going to go with you. How much is it? I mean, that's a pretty
just
good
because of those videos.
Because of this. And if you were to look at a lot of other industries, I recently, as I was car shopping, right, I signed up for a service. I got like 25 emails in the first 6 hours. These guys were on it. I'm getting phone calls, text messages, the whole 9 yards. Average contractor, they're calling back 3 days later. It's just not, the technology is not there yet for a lot of these guys, which is where the opportunity is. If you can give people the level of service they're used to in other industries, but in something that's already got super high demand, they're meeting you for the first time, but they've seen your face 6 times in emails. They're meeting, Joe for the first time, and they've only talked to him once on the phone. Who's going to have more trust?
Right. Definitely. It's one of those golden opportunities that, we've become passionate about projecting into the ecosystem.
Yep.
And so we're looking forward to continuing to help people get into this industry. And, very soon we're going to be doing this podcast with Mike Rowe, and we'll
shout out Mike Rowe. I'm going to say his name every podcast until he reaches out to me. Or if anybody watching this knows Mike Rowe,
Mike Rowe, we could really help each other out.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. I think that was enough for today as far as value. Don't want to overwhelm these people with information, but if you guys have any suggestions on topics you want to hear more about, or any specific questions, feel free to comment in the YouTube comment section.
Yep.
We're also going to be putting these audio versions on iTunes podcasts and likely Spotify as well. I think now with Spotify we could add video too.
Yeah. We'll be distributing, I think, to like 6 different platforms.
Yeah. And if you want if you have a specific question, you want a specific answer, you can always email us at support@cabinetstartup.com. We'd love to help you get started on the right foot if you have any questions about anything. Other than that, let's make it a great rest of the week, man. I hope you kick ass over there in Texas. I hope your team does in Texas. And we'll stay in touch. We'll talk to you guys same place, same time next week.
See you next time, everybody.